Okay, so I think it's good we start with Surah Al-Fatiha. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين صدق الله العلي العظيم أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين ولعن الله على أعدائهم أجمعين من الأولين والآخرين آمين يا رب العالمين. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك، عليكم منا جميعا سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار، ولا جعل الله آخر الأحد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. Peace be upon you, O Aba Abdullah, and upon the souls who have gathered in your courtyard. Upon you, from us all, is the peace of God forever, for as long as we remain and as long as night and day endure. And may God never make this our last pledge to visit you. Peace be upon Hussein, and upon Ali, the son of Hussein, and upon the children of Hussein, and upon the companions of Hussein. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So this is the third of our series of sessions for the nights of Ashura and Arba'een on the subject of Tabyeen or clarification. As with all of our other sessions, such as those on patience or the lantern of the path or the art of supplication, it is very strongly recommended that anyone consuming this, at the very least, review the previous parts prior to consuming this part. This is because of the nature of the discussion and the manner of discourse that really does require that each part build upon the one that came before. This is to avoid confusion, misunderstanding, and any invalid assumptions that can lead to what would be the antithesis of Tabyeen. Now, while we do have a recap for each session, the recap is, of course, highly summarized. And in order to get the full nuance, the full detail, the previous session would have to be consumed, studied, and reflected upon. Nevertheless, if I can get a salawat, then we can move on to the recap.
الله صل على محمد
اللهم صل على محمد وآل
محمد وآل
محمد.
So, in our previous session, we delved deeper into the nature and urgency of Tabyeen, the sacred duty of clarification, as a paramount form of jihad in our present age. We reflected on how this struggle transcends mere physical confrontation, manifesting instead as an intellectual and spiritual battle against pervasive distortion, misinformation, and the deliberate inversion of truth. The session highlighted the concept of the soft war, a warfare not of bullets, but of narratives, where falsehoods are celebrated and justice is condemned, where oppressors are cast as victims and the innocent are labeled as terrorists. We saw how the global media and powerful regimes weaponize propaganda to sever societies from their moral compass, undermining their steadfastness and resilience. We examined historical precedents from the prophetic era through to the Caliphate of Imam Ali, revealing that this fight against sedition has always demanded clarity, insight, and courage to speak the truth in the face of confusion and internal turmoil. The lessons of Siffin remind us of how doubt and ambiguity amongst even the most knowledgeable can erode righteousness. The Quranic injunction to clarify and not conceal the truth remains a timeless mandate, one that binds scholars, thinkers, and every believer who holds knowledge and insight. This duty is not passive, but it is active. It calls for a strategic, collective effort to propagate clarity, to awaken conviction, and to resist the subtle poison of doubt. We explored the contemporary arena where ideological warfare, psychological infiltration, and digital distortion target especially the youth, aiming to alienate them from their faith and their identity, aiming to hollow out the core of Islamic civilization and to present submission as modernity. Yet we recalled the Quranic promise that even a small band of steadfast believers can overcome overwhelming odds. Finally, the session affirmed that Tabyeen is not merely defensive, but it is the very engine of revival. By illuminating the truth amid the fog of confusion, believers become part of a noble legacy. Those who invite to God, enjoin what is right, and forbid what is wrong. Silence and ambiguity are not neutral, but rather they are complicit. Therefore, every voice must rise to clarify with wisdom, with unity, and with unwavering purpose. Please give me a salawat and we'll move on to today's session, which talks about the benefits and effects of clarification.
اللهم
صل
صل على
على
محمد وآل
محمد
محمد وعجل
وآل
So clarification is not a mere exchange of words. It is not simply that one speaks and the other listens. Rather, clarification must evolve into structured public discourse, a living, breathing culture of understanding that shapes the directions of a community. This transformation requires not only sincerity of intent, but also a commitment to reason, logic, and restraint. The language of discourse must be deliberate, must be articulate, must be free from exaggeration, and it must be capable of carrying both truth and wisdom with dignity. For ideas to influence a society meaningfully, they must first be understood and embraced by the people. A clarifying word must strike the heart before it can move the body. This means that truth must be spoken in a manner that is clear, courteous, and intellectually grounded. The objective is not simply to inform, but to instill conviction, to create a shared awareness that can mature into collective action. The process of clarification is not confined to the theoretical or the abstract. It is a vital instrument for cultivating societal will and long-term vision. When a society speaks of ideals such as justice and progress, these are not to remain as distant aspirations or mere political slogans. They must become lived realities, the very air that a people breathe. And this requires sustained repetition, intellectual willpower, and firm collective determination. For example, merely declaring a decade as one of justice and progress does not make it so. To convert such ideals into outcomes, clarification must become widespread, must become deliberate and programmatic. Progress is not born from declarations. It emerges from disciplined articulation, from public discourse, and the translation of abstract ideas into functional policy. It must be understood, it must be studied, it must be modeled, and only then can it be acted upon. This is where the responsibility of scholars, thinkers, and planners becomes paramount. It is they who must generate these theoretical frameworks, rooted in Islamic principles, that devise academic models that define what justice and progress look like in a lived societal context. When these models are clarified and codified, they may then be implemented across institutions and across society at large. Only through such methodical and illuminated clarification can a people feel, after decades, that they have truly advanced. In Quran, in Surah Yusuf, the chapter of Prophet Joseph, 12th chapter of Quran, verse 108, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, "Say, this is my way. I invite to God with insight, I and those who follow me." And in Surah Az-Zukhruf, the chapter of the ornaments, 43rd chapter of the Quran, verse 44, Allah then says, "Indeed, it is a reminder for you and your people, and soon you will be questioned." Please give me a salawat and we proceed.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل على محمد
وعجل فرجه.
So now we look at clarification and the culture of mutual advice or nasiha. Now, in times of confrontation and challenge, two qualities are indispensable. Firstly, it is insight or basira, and the second one is steadfastness or sabr. These are not optional virtues. They are rather the very foundations of resilience for any believing society. Without these two, even the strongest system becomes vulnerable. With them, even the most well-equipped enemy cannot prevail. Amir al-Mu'mineen, Imam Ali, described this principle with timeless eloquence. And this is from al-Balagha, and like with all of the references herein, you can find the citations and details within the write-up. So Imam Ali, he says, "And none shall bear this standard except he who possesses insight, patience, and knowledge of the places of truth." The safeguarding of these qualities within a society depends in a large part on the continuity of mutual counsel, of sincere brotherly advice exchanged among the faithful. This is not a peripheral moral recommendation. Rather, it is a divine command rooted in the core of the Quranic worldview. In the Quran, in Surah Al-Asr, the chapter of time, 103rd chapter of the Quran, verses 1 through to 3, Allah says, by the passage of time, truly mankind is in a state of loss, except those who have faith, who do righteous deeds, and who enjoin each other to follow the truth, and enjoin each other to patience. This is the culture of nasiha, of sincere advice and mutual encouragement. This is not only a moral obligation, but a form of spiritual insurance. It prevents social fragmentation. It protects the collective morale, and sustains the willpower required to resist enemy influence and internal decline. When believers advise one another towards the truth and towards endurance, they act as guardians of the community's spiritual immune system. If this chain of counsel is broken, if mutual advising is abandoned, the consequences are grave. People begin to feel isolated, hope dissipates, the internal compass falters, aspirations weaken, and with them, the resolve to pursue great aims begins to fade. What was once achievable begins to appear impossible. Lofty goals are first postponed, then dismissed, and eventually forgotten. This is precisely why adversaries target the culture of advice and guidance. They seek to silence voices of conscience, to interrupt conversations of truth, to make sincere speech seem futile or even dangerous. In such an environment, disillusionment spreads, and the foundations of societal resolve begin to crack. Hence, the responsibility falls upon the thinkers, the scholars, and the truth speakers, and the truth promoters even, to preserve this sacred chain, to enjoin truth and patience, and to defend the faithful against despair. Please give me another salawat and we proceed.
اللهم صل على
صل على
محمد
محمد
وآل
محمد
محمد فرجهم.
So now let us look at the idea of operationalizing divine concepts, going from theory to reality. One of the most urgent needs facing Islamic societies today is the translation of Islamic values from the realm of theory into the domain of action. Islam is not a series of abstract ideas locked in books or confined to ritual practice. It is a dynamic civilization-building force, one whose principles are meant to govern both the soul as well as society. The Islamic worldview is rich with divine concepts: Tawheed, the unity, the oneness of God; Tawakkul, reliance on God; taklif, duty, ithar, self-sacrifice, jihad, struggle, and shahada, martyrdom, amongst others. These are not mere slogans or spiritual ornaments. These are blueprints for a dignified human life and a just society. But for these values to shape the world, they must be clarified to the people and given practical expression. During the early stages of the COVID-19 pandemic, for example, the concept of charity or sadaqah, something deeply rooted in the Quran and Sunnah, was revived across many Muslim communities with remarkable vitality. Through sincere clarification and encouragement, charitable initiatives spread rapidly. Youth, civic groups, religious institutions, and even state agencies all came together to serve those in need. This was not just social work. It was theology in motion. It was a concept clarified, accepted, and then activated. Another powerful example lies in the revolutionary movement led by Imam Khomeini, may God bless his pure soul. He did not present Islamic concepts as abstract ideals or private moral concerns. Rather, he clarified them with prophetic clarity, igniting a nationwide, indeed a global awakening that ultimately manifested as the Islamic Revolution in Iran and the Islamic awakening across the entire world. Imam Khomeini repeatedly invoked Quranic imperatives that affirmed the necessity of obeying divine guidance in all dimensions of life, not just in personal acts of devotion, but in societal organization and political leadership. We can consider one example by looking at this one verse. This is from Surah An-Nisa, the chapter of the women, 4th chapter of the Quran, verse number 64, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, "We did not send any apostle but to be obeyed by God's permission." This obedience is not partial or selective. It extends to all dimensions of life. Religion, in its Quranic conception, must govern not only one's prayers and fasts, but also one's economics, politics, culture, and governance. Another powerful verse invoked by Imam Khomeini was, and this is from Surah Al-Imran, the chapter of the family of Imran, 3rd chapter of the Quran, verse 146, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, "How many a prophet there has been with whom a multitude of godly men fought. They neither broke down for what afflicted them in the way of God, nor did they weaken or abase themselves." This is not the description of a passive community. It speaks of a committed and active body of believers who, through the medium of governance and resistance, bring divine guidance into the public sphere. A third verse, often cited by Imam Khomeini, which became a cornerstone of his revolutionary rhetoric was, and this is from Surah Saba, the chapter of Sheba, 34th chapter of the Quran, verse number 46, where Allah says, "Say, I give you just a single advice, that you rise up for God's sake in pairs or individually." This rising, clarified through the words and actions of Imam Khomeini, was not a metaphorical one. It meant the establishment of an Islamic system, one that would manifest the values of divine justice and human dignity. And finally, the following verse defines this foundational responsibility of all who carry divine truths. And this is from Surah Al-Ahzab, the chapter of the Confederates, 33rd chapter of the Quran, verse number 39. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, "They are those who convey the messages of God, fear him and fear no one except God." It is through such clarifications, bold, wise, and sincere, that divine concepts enter public consciousness and transform into revolutionary realities. These verses were not new to the Muslim community. They had been read for centuries. But it was only when they were clarified, contextualized, and courageously acted upon that they became engines of history. Let us now look at clarification as a shield against psychological warfare. In times of confusion and ideological sedition, fitna, the most pressing responsibility upon every believer, man and woman alike, is the propagation of truth with clarity. Silence in such moments is not a neutral stance. It is a vulnerability that adversaries exploit. It is through speech, clarified, sincere, and purposeful, that the fog of manipulation is lifted and falsehoods are unmasked. One cannot hide behind neutrality once the truth has been grasped. To know and yet withhold is a form of betrayal. Clarification, then, is not an act of personal expression. It is a moral obligation, a divine trust. Indeed, the Quran commands, and this is from Surah Al-Ahzab, the chapter of the Confederates, 33rd chapter of the Quran, verse 39. They are those who convey the messages of God, fear Him, and fear no one except God. Yet this duty is not fulfilled by emotional slogans or rhetorical flourishes. It requires discernment. In an age where deception is refined and narratives are weaponized, it becomes increasingly difficult to distinguish the aggressor from the victim, the enemy from the ally, the oppressor from the oppressed. Therefore, the first step in the duty of clarification is to labor for insight, to study, to reflect, and to ensure the truth is correctly understood. Once that is achieved, it must be articulated with clarity and conviction, and it must not be clouded by political posturing or strategic vagueness. The realm of culture is not the realm of political maneuvering. Culture is the domain of meaning, of purification, explanation, and illumination. It is not to be wielded like a politician's tool, but honored as the tongue of a civilization's soul. Those entrusted with cultural influence, the writers, the poets, the artists, the scholars, must recognize that their words have consequences. In the world of culture, their task is not to win points, but to untie knots. It is to resolve confusion, not to deepen it. It is to open minds, not to polarize them. It is to heal and not to harm. Clarification must serve this end. True eloquence, then, is not about ornamental speech. It is about clarity of meaning. Just as, for example, we describe the poetry of someone like Hafiz as eloquent because it speaks directly to the heart with precision, so too must our clarifiers speak with weight and understanding. They must only say what they truly comprehend and strive constantly to deepen their understanding, for only then will their words bear the weight of truth. Please give me a salawat, and we then proceed to clarification and the protection of the people's will.
اللهم صل على محمد
وعجل فرجه.
The schemes of the enemy are not distant abstractions. They are immediate threats, made possible not through their strength, but through our negligence. When we fail to clarify, to inform, to awaken, we create openings, we create attack vectors that hostile forces are very quick to exploit. Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib, Imam Ali, peace and blessings be upon him, warned with very sharp foresight. And this is, again, the references are in the write-up. This is actually from Ghurur al-Hikam. Imam Ali says, if he sleeps, the enemy does not sleep. If we look at the history of the Islamic Republic, we learn that it has taught us this lesson repeatedly. With the victory of the Islamic Revolution, global arrogance, led by the United States, recognized belatedly the depth of their miscalculation. The intelligence agencies and political establishments of the West had failed to perceive the latent power of Islamic conviction and the guidance of the Quran within the hearts of the people. In their arrogance, they underestimated the Basiji spirit, the mobilization of faith, and the capacity of sincere leadership. In the 4 decades since that revolution, these adversaries have launched countless conspiracies, overt and covert, to reclaim their influence. Yet their efforts have repeatedly failed. And this is for 2 central reasons: the people's unyielding presence in the arena and the nation's commitment to Islamic principles. The first of these is rooted in trust. Trust in leadership, in divine promises, and in one another. The second is maintained through sincere and courageous clarification. When people are informed with truth, when they are reminded of their mission and their enemy, when the path ahead is illuminated with divine guidance, they rise. When a society rises with faith and unity, there is no worldly power that can defeat it. The strength of a society, the strength of a nation, is measured not merely by its armaments or by its infrastructure, but by the clarity of its moral direction and the cohesion of its people. Whenever the hearts of the people aligned with the guidance of the righteous leadership, their will becomes unbreakable. Neither America nor any other so-called superpower could mislead or fracture such a people. This sacred alignment, however, must be continually safeguarded. The scholars, the poets, the writers, and intellectuals of the Ummah carry a weighty responsibility in this regard. They are not mere commentators. They are protectors of insight, and they are shepherds of awareness. If they fail to clarify, if they allow ambiguity, fear, or doubt to prevail, the people are left defenseless. Therefore, the mission of clarification is a form of protection. It guards the people's insight, it maintains their awareness, and it shields their collective will. In this way, the enemy's strategies are rendered somewhat powerless, and the nation and society remains rooted in divine strength. And while this might be, someone might think this is for just the Islamic Republic of Iran, this is not the case. This is for any Muslim community, no matter how big or how small, or in fact for any honorable community. Let us now look at the idea of clarification and solving real-world problems. Foreign powers and imperialists of all different styles have long interfered in the affairs of the Muslim community and in the affairs of the oppressed, intensifying crises and deepening divisions. These interventions are not passive, they are active strategies designed to sow confusion, to destabilize governance, and fracture the collective resolve of the people, of the believers. Yet history has shown that such schemes, no matter how sophisticated, can be overcome. The antidote to these manufactured tribulations lies in the conscious mobilization of the Muslim intellect and spirit, particularly through the act of clarification. When the scholars, thinkers, artists, and other cultural figures unite around truth, and when they understand the sensitivities of their time and they speak with courage, they can lift the burdens placed upon the Ummah, upon the community. This is not a theoretical hope. It is a proven method. The Quranic tradition affirms the power of truth when spoken with sincerity and conviction, and the prophetic model demonstrates how crises can be transfigured into opportunities when the Ummah acts with insight. But for this transformation to occur, clarification must be carried out correctly. It must be accurate, courageous, and oriented towards empowerment. The people must be reminded of their capacity, of their worth, and of their covenant with God. This clarification, when paired with reliance on divine strength and the latent potential within the Ummah, becomes the key to relief and renewal. Therefore, far from being a passive academic exercise, clarification is a strategic necessity. It is a force of resistance. It is a path of healing and a foundation for renewal. When wielded with wisdom, it can dismantle the schemes of the enemy, and it can rekindle the flame of collective hope. Please give me a salawat, and we move on to the catastrophic consequences of silence.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
So in every age, the hearts and minds of the youth are battlegrounds in the greater struggle between truth and falsehood. Two forces in particular shape their outlook, one which is external and the other, tragically, internal. The first is the propaganda of the enemy. Sophisticated, relentless, and psychologically engineered to induce apathy, doubt, and estrangement from the sacred principles of Islam. It subtly chips away at conviction, desensitizes the soul, and casts the ideals of tawheed, servitude, and divine justice as being outdated or extreme. But there is a second force, and it is no less damaging. And that is the silence of those who ought to speak. The lack of clarification, the absence of a strong, confident, and rational defense of Islamic beliefs. And in many cases, this internal failure proves more harmful than the external assault. Why? Because in societies like, for example, the Islamic Republic, the means and structures for communicating divine truth exists. Yet if those responsible, scholars, teachers, cultural leaders, fall silent, or worse, fail to articulate truth with clarity and conviction, they leave a vacuum. And vacuums are not left empty for long. They are filled by confusion, by misguidance, and ultimately disbelief. And this is not just the case in the Islamic Republic, this is across every Muslim community from the east of the world to the west. Even when enemy propaganda is weak or indirect, the absence of proactive clarification can still lead to collapse. What is needed is not merely repetition of slogans, but a robust, thoughtful, and contextual explanation of Islamic beliefs. One that is spiritually grounded, intellectually persuasive, and socially relevant. Foundational doctrines such as Tawheed, the absolute oneness of God, Wilaya, divine authority, Ubudiyya, servitude, and Taslim, submission to the divine command, must not be assumed to be understood. They must be clarified anew for each generation. Without this, the youth will not inherit Islam. They will inherit its outer form, but not its living essence. This is why silence is so dangerous. The absence of clarification becomes a form of betrayal, not necessarily by intention, but by effect. It surrenders the most sacred truths of our faith to distortion, abandonment, or oblivion. Clarification, then, is not just a duty, it is a safeguard. It is the defense line between divine civilization and cultural collapse. Now let us look at Imam Khomeini, may God rest his pure soul, as a living example of the power of clarification. History is often changed not by armies or wealth, but by the clear voice of a man who speaks the truth without fear. For the people of Iran, and indeed for the global Muslim Ummah, the Muslim community, that voice was Imam Ruhullah al-Musawi al-Khomeini. May God bless his pure soul. His gift was not merely in his vision, but in his power of clarification. He awaked a nation, not by inciting emotion, but by cultivating insight. He spoke plainly, but profoundly, consistently calling attention to the unseen hand behind the oppression inflicted on the Muslim world. From the very beginning of his movement, he identified America not merely as a foreign power, but as the architect of tyranny within the homeland, within Iran. In a landmark declaration from 1963, Imam Khomeini stated, "Let the President of America know that in the eyes of the Iranian nation, he is the most hated of all people for the injustices he has committed against our Muslim nation. Today, all of our problems stem from America and from Israel. Israel is also from America. These representatives are also from America. All of them are agents of America. If not, why do they not stand up to America?" This was not empty rhetoric. It was clarification rooted in analysis, rooted in spirituality, and rooted in courage. He drew back the veil, revealing the global systems that enabled local oppression. And he did so at great personal cost, enduring exile, imprisonment, and threats, yet never relenting. Gradually, this clarified vision became shared amongst the people. By 1978 and 1979, it had evolved into a mass movement. But the target of this movement was not simply the Pahlavi monarchy. It was the entire imperialist order that sustained it. The people understood this. They did not simply rebel against a king, but against the spiritual and political chains of dependency. Imam Khomeini understood that clarity, once internalized by the people, becomes a force stronger than an army. A movement born from awareness can neither be co-opted nor easily crushed. He constantly reminded the nation of the divine promise. And this is from Quran, Surah Muhammad, the chapter of Prophet Muhammad, 47th chapter of the Quran, verse number 7, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, "If you help God, he will help you and make your feet firm." It was this conviction that allowed the nation to uproot a monarchy backed by the world's greatest superpower and to replace it with a system rooted in the Quran and the legacy of the Prophet and his purified household. Peace and blessings be upon him and them. Not a single tank or cannon could have achieved what truth clarified and awakened in the soul of the people. Clarification then was not an accessory to the revolution. It was its very engine. It did not merely explain the world, it changed it. Please give me a salawat and we'll look at the role of the seminary in revolutionary clarification.
اللهم صل على
Muhammad
محمد
While the contribution of university students to the Islamic Revolution was significant and commendable, it must be acknowledged that without the pivotal role of the Islamic seminaries, especially that of Qom, the revolution may never have become a comprehensive nationwide movement. The Hawza, which is what the Islamic seminary is called, the Hawza was not merely a participant. It was the intellectual and spiritual engine of the revolution. The difference lay in reach, structure, and sacred authority. Whereas universities had geographical limitations, the seminaries possessed a decentralized but highly effective network. Students came to Qom from towns and villages across the country, studied under senior scholars, and then returned to their communities, not only during academic breaks, but throughout the year, armed with knowledge, with conviction, and clarity. These students did not merely relay abstract theories. Through pulpits, through religious gatherings, through local lectures, and through personal relationships, they transmitted the clarified vision of the revolution to the people in a language that resonated deeply. Let me say that again. These students did not merely relay abstract theories. Through pulpits, religious gatherings, local lectures, and personal relationships, they transmitted the clarified vision of the revolution to the people in a language that resonated deeply. They gave sermons not only in mosques, but also in marketplaces, in village squares, and in private homes. Wherever people could listen, they clarified. Central to this mechanism was the marja'iyya, the system of religious authority vested in the grand jurists. Imam Khomeini, as a leading marja', carried both scholarly authority and spiritual trust. His pronouncements were not seen as political commentary, but as binding ethical declarations. This sacred status, combined with his revolutionary message, allowed the seminaries to become the bridge between divine principle and public mobilization. To illustrate the depth of this relationship, a personal moment is recalled. This is a reflection shared by Imam Khamenei, may God protect him. In the early days of the revolution, at a gathering in the Masjid A'azam of Qom, he delivered a lecture in the presence of Imam Khomeini. In that speech, he referenced the following verse, and this is from Surah An-Nahl, the chapter of the bee, 16th chapter of the Quran, verses 68 to 69. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, "And your Lord inspired the bee, saying, make your home in the mountains and in the trees and in the trellises that they erect. Then eat from every kind of fruit and follow meekly the ways of your Lord." He likened the seminarians to bees, drawn to the honey of Imam Khomeini's words, then dispersing throughout the land to pour the sweetness into the cups of the people. And where necessary, like bees, they stung, they resisted. It was the presence of the seminary in Qom and its widespread network of students that enabled the revolutionary message to penetrate even the most remote corners of the country. Imam Khomeini himself recognized this. He once narrated how news reached him in Paris that in a distant village in Khomein, an elderly scholar, local scholar, had led a demonstration. Upon hearing this, he remarked, "I am certain of the victory of this movement." It was not the slogans alone that moved him. It was who carried them. That unknown scholar from a forgotten village could articulate the same message as the centers of power confirmed that the revolution had become internalized at every level of society. Without the seminary's clarifying voice, the revolution may have remained an elite protest, but with it, it became a people's uprising, rooted in divine legitimacy. So now let us look at cultural transmission, clarification, and youth engagement. Ideas alone do not change the world. It is when they flow into the hearts and minds of people, when they are clarified, internalized, and lived, that they begin to shape history. The Islamic Revolution was not built upon sudden emotion or short-lived sentiment. It was the fruit of decades of cultural transmission, in which clarified truths were steadily passed from scholars to students and from pulpits to the people. This is the sacred dynamic of cultural leadership. When sincere ideas are delivered with clarity and conviction, they settle deeply into the consciousness of the people and bear fruit across generations. And among the most responsive recipients of this transmission have always been the youth. Even before the revolution, there were scholars who focused intently on building intellectual bridges with students. Imam Khamenei, in recalling that era, recounts how his engagement with young people, particularly those in secondary schools and universities, became a platform for transmitting clarified Islamic concepts. In a city in Mashhad, he held evening gatherings between Maghrib and Isha in a local mosque. With nothing more than a chalkboard and 30 minutes, he would teach. The majority of the audience were youth, alert, inquisitive, and eager for the truth. One night, Shaheed Dr. Muhammad Jawad Bahonar, a scholar, a teacher, and a future martyr, visited from Tehran, and he joined the gathering. Seeing the vitality of the youth and the atmosphere of serious reflection, he was astonished. Despite his own deep familiarity with university environments, he remarked that he had never seen so many students assembled in one mosque for the purpose of learning from a religious scholar. The number? Merely 200. But the sincerity and focus of these 200 eclipsed the grandeur of institutions. Now, this moment truly speaks volumes. True cultural work is not measured in scale, but in sincerity. When even a small number of young people gathered to learn, to question, and to be clarified, the impact can ripple through an entire society. It is in such intimate spaces, not television studios or state ceremonies, that revolutions are born. This is why scholars and intellectuals must never underestimate their influence, nor should they delay clarification until platforms are perfect. One room, one gathering, one clear voice, one Zoom call. That's all it takes to light a fire in the heart of the youth. A fire of faith, of reason, and of responsibility. Please give me a salawat and we'll look at the Friday sermons of the 1980s, the pulpit as a beacon.
اللهم صل
اللهم
على
صل على
محمد
محمد
وآل
وآل
محمد.
محمد عجل فرجه.
So in the most fragile and threatening moments of a nation's journey, when the pillars of stability seem to tremble and the enemy strikes with cunning and cruelty, it is often the pulpit that stands tall as a beacon of light. Such was the role of the Friday prayer during the early years of the Islamic Revolution, particularly in 1981, a year that is etched into the national memory with the blood of martyrs. That year witnessed heinous crimes perpetrated by internal enemies, namely the MKO, the MEK terrorist organization, which culminated in the martyrdom of some of the most senior figures of the Islamic Republic. On the 28th of June, Ayatollah Beheshti and 71 of his companions were killed in a bombing. Barely 2 months later, on the 30th of August, President Muhammad Ali Rajai and Prime Minister Muhammad Jawad Bahonar were also martyred in a very similar attack. During those turbulent days, as fear and grief gripped the nation, the pulpit of Tehran's Friday prayer assumed a colossal responsibility. It was no longer a routine sermon. It became a strategic channel for truth, comfort, and national direction. Each week from that pulpit, light radiated to the entire country. Realities were clarified. The people were reminded of their cause, their enemy, and their responsibilities. It was from there that confusion was dispelled and sedition was confronted. The Friday prayer became more than a spiritual ritual. It became the heart of ideological resistance. This is the power of a free pulpit. one that is unchained by political opportunism or by worldly interest. When it speaks truthfully, it becomes the platform of the prophets. It restores calm to a wounded people. It transforms tragedy into determination, and it ensures that the blood of martyrs is not spilt in vain. In every era, the pulpit remains an entrusted trust, an amana. Those who ascend it must not merely preach, they must clarify. They must connect the divine message with the struggles of the time. They must awaken the hearts, they must defend the truth, and they must prepare the people for what lies ahead. It is in this way, through mosques, through pulpits, through pens and gatherings, that the jihad of clarification becomes a living reality, safeguarding both faith and future. Please give me a loud salawat and we start looking at the exemplars of clarification.
اللهم
صل
صل
على
على
محمد
محمد وآل
وآل
محمد
محمد.
So from the very beginning, the divine mission of the prophets, peace be upon them, was not merely to convey isolated commands. Rather, it was to awaken within mankind the innate capacity for the recognition of truth and to illuminate the path of God through uncompromising clarification. In al-Balagha, the commander of the faithful, peace and blessings be upon him, describes the arrival of the prophets in truly profound terms. Then God sent his messengers and a succession of his prophets to them, to make them fulfill the pledge of their primordial nature, to remind them of the forgotten bounties of God, to complete the proof against them through preaching, to stir for them the buried treasures of intellect, and to show them the signs of God's omnipotence. The mission of the messengers, peace and blessings be upon them, was to awaken mankind from its heedlessness. They were sent not only to deliver legislation, but to uncover that which lies buried within the soul, within the fitra, the primordial nature, the treasures of reason, and the instinctive recognition of divine justice. Humanity had fallen into forgetfulness concerning the very blessings that uphold existence, life, consciousness, health, reason, and the moral capacity to distinguish between falsehood and truth. The messengers, peace be upon them, reminded humanity of these blessings and clarified that submission to God alone is the path to a life of dignity and freedom. They completed the argument of God upon humanity, ensuring that no one could claim ignorance of the truth. But the divine argument was not completed merely through words. It was through clarification, through tabyeen, through making realities visible, accessible, and undeniable, even when falsehood was adorned in the guise of righteousness. The enemies of the prophets thrived on ignorance and ambiguity. They manipulated truth through deceit, through hypocrisy, and through concealment. The prophets came to shatter these veils, to illuminate realities, even when it threatened the throne of tyrants. They unveiled the hidden virtues of wisdom, as the sermon continues, drawing forth the powers of intellect and contemplation that lay dormant in society. They taught people to think, to reflect, and to ask, what is justice? Who has the right to lead? What does it mean to serve God alone? When those inner treasures were awakened, the prophets showed them the signs of divine power scattered across creation. Signs that point not to multiplicity, but to the oneness of God, not to chaos, but to purpose, not to oppression, but to justice. Yet the intellect alone is insufficient without guidance. Without revelation, reason can become enslaved to ego or corrupted by a power. The messengers therefore walked with mankind, guiding them through that treacherous journey, urging them to rise, to purify themselves, and to walk the straight path, illuminated by both reason and revelation. This then is the foundation of the jihad of clarification. It is the inherited mission of the prophets to make truth manifest, to reveal falsehood for what it is, and to liberate the human being from both internal and external chains. Let us now look at the Holy Prophet, who truly was a life of unyielding clarification. Among the most powerful exemplars of divine clarification is the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him and his family. His entire life was a manifestation of endurance, vision, and unwavering commitment to making the truth clear, not only to those around him, but to the world across generations. He rose in an age of ignorance, amidst a society entrenched in tribal arrogance, moral collapse, and spiritual deviation. Yet despite standing alone at the beginning of his mission in Mecca, the Prophet of God never faltered in proclaiming the truth. He did not compromise, nor was he paralyzed by fear in the face of overwhelming opposition. Whether confronting the Quraysh, the powerful elites of Arabia, or addressing a people unmoved by his knowledge and sincerity, the Prophet continued to speak the truth, to repeat it, to clarify it, and to make it manifest. He endured mockery, boycotts, and violence. He was maligned by the arrogant chieftains, abandoned by many of his own kin, and repeatedly pressured to soften his message. But never once did he withhold the divine message, nor dilute its meaning for the sake of comfort or power. His was a mission of clarification before concession, of principle before popularity. Even after Islam gained momentum and power in Medina, and the Prophet Muhammad assumed leadership over a growing community, his trials did not cease. The tribal armies of Arabia surrounded him. Two great empires of the time, Rome and Persia, loomed as hostile superpowers. Hunger and economic pressure bore down on the believers, sometimes leaving them without food for days. Yet he persevered. He clarified the truth for emperors and generals, for shepherds and slaves. He penned letters to kings, led armies where necessary, and endured encirclement and deprivation, not for conquest, but for the sake of upholding the truth and liberating the oppressed. Some in his time wavered. They questioned the cost. They urged compromise. But the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him and his family, never yielded. His strength was not the strength of wealth or numbers. It was the strength of clarity, certainty, and divine trust. By the grace of God, that steadfastness bore fruit. A movement that began with a single voice in Mecca transformed into a civilization of justice and faith. The Prophet did not only bring revelation, he embodied the ethics of clarification. In speech and silence, in prayer and battle, he stood as a witness before humanity, the light that could not be extinguished, the tongue that would not bend before tyranny. Now let us look at the commander of the faithful, clarification through sermons and governance. But before that, please give me a salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
اللهم
صل
صل
على
على
محمد
محمد
وآل
وعجل
محمد.
فرجهم.
Among the successors of the Prophet Muhammad, no figure embodies this legacy of clarification more profoundly than Ali ibn Abi Talib, the commander of the faithful, peace and blessings be upon him. His life was a convergence of divine spirituality, profound wisdom, and courageous governance, all unified by the unwavering commitment to make the truth manifest, even when it came at a cost. His virtues may be broadly classified into three distinct categories. First, there are those divine spiritual qualities that defy comparison, such as his devotion in worship, his intimate nearness to the Prophet, and the unique station of his soul. Second, he possessed human virtues of excellence, compassion, courage, eloquence, and a magnetic moral character that drew admiration from Muslims and non-Muslims alike. And third, there were his governing virtues: justice, impartiality, moral clarity, and most relevant here, clarification. The sermons and letters of the Commander of the Faithful preserved in al-Balagha are not mere rhetorical expressions. They are instruments of intellectual and moral illumination. Many of his sermons were delivered in turbulent political contexts, when the community was divided, when fitna, sedition was widespread, and when confusion clouded the truth. His words pierced that darkness. He did not speak to flatter, nor did he offer comfort at the expense of truth. He exposed hypocrisies, corrected distortions, and declared what others were too afraid to say. In his letters, whether addressed to enemies such as Muawiyah or to his own governors like Malik al-Ashtar, Imam Ali, peace and blessings be upon him, consistently upheld the same principle: clarify the truth even if the world resists it. His epistles to errant subordinates were not merely administrative corrections. They were ethical reminders infused with theological depth and prophetic foresight. Indeed, clarification was not only a verbal act for the Imam, rather it was the axis of his imamate. His caliphate was defined not by political maneuvering, but by a sacred duty to preserve the truth of Islam as it had been revealed. He endured rebellion, he endured betrayal, and ruled a very fragmented ummah community. But never once did he exchange clarity for popularity. He ruled with justice, and justice is impossible without clarity. His governance was the practical extension of the mission of the prophets. Just as they were sent to stir the buried treasures of intellect and complete the argument of God, so too did the Commander of the Faithful reveal the concealed truths of a society submerged in tribalism, in greed, and in deceit. His legacy in this regard is not abstract. It is encoded in every line of Nahj al-Balagha, in every ruling, in every stand he took against those who distorted religion for worldly gain. His example is the benchmark for all those who claim to carry the message of divine leadership. Clarification is not optional. It is the trust of God, and it must be upheld, even in the face of armies and slander. Now we look at the clarification jihad of the Imams of Ahl al-Bayt. From the martyrdom of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him and his family, until the occultation of the 12th Imam, may our souls be his ransom, the Imams of the Ahl al-Bayt engaged in a continuous and strategic campaign, one whose defining character was not military conquest, but was clarification. This jihad of clarification was not waged with swords, except in the cases of Imam Ali, Imam Hassan, and Imam Husayn, but rather with knowledge, perseverance, and the power of speech. This long arc of resistance, spanning approximately 250 years, had three clear and inseparable objectives. The first, to clarify the reality of Islam, as revealed to the Prophet, untainted by political distortions or fabricated interpretations. Number two, to clarify the concept of imamat as a divinely appointed leadership and the only legitimate framework for political authority within Islam. To establish, as far as possible, a just society rooted in Tawheed and guided by the representatives of God on earth. In this context, we find profound meaning in the words attributed to Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq, peace and blessings be upon him, where he says, "Revive our matter. May God have mercy on those who revive our matter." And again, the references for this are in the write-up. To understand this statement is to understand the nature of their jihad. In an age where public association with the Ahl al-Bayt could lead to imprisonment or execution, to revive their matter was to place oneself in mortal danger. It was not a passive remembrance. It was an act of resistance. It was a declaration that the truth had not died, that the clarification of God's religion continued, even under the watchful eyes of despots. The remembrance gatherings, majalis, and mourning processions, hayat, that form part of the Shia tradition are not mere rituals. They are, in their origin and purpose, platforms for this clarification jihad. They transmit theology, they expose injustice, they teach moral courage, and they prepare the grounds for future resistance. This is why the Imams not only permitted but encouraged their companions to establish such gatherings, even in secret, even at the risk of death. The life of each Imam reflects this jihad in a distinct form. Imam Musa ibn Ja'far, for example, endured long years, Musa al-Kadhim he's known as, endured long years of imprisonment, not due to rebellion, but due to his quiet, steady influence in clarifying the true teachings of Islam and rejecting the legitimacy of corrupt rule. His very presence, his words, and his refusal to remain silent made him intolerable to the tyrants. Why were so many of the Imams martyred? Why was Imam Jawad martyred at the age of 25? Why was Imam al-Askari poisoned at the age of 28? Why was Imam Musa ibn Ja'far tortured to death in a prison cell? Because their lives were lives of struggle through clarification, and tyrants fear truth much more than they fear armies. Therefore, when the Imams said, "Keep our matter alive," they were calling upon the faithful to engage in the most difficult and dangerous form of struggle. Not one of swords, but one of light. The light of truth, spoken without fear. The light of guidance, offered even in darkness. The light of God's religion, safeguarded and preserved across generations. Please give me a salawat and we look at Lady Zainab and Imam Sajjad as guardians of Karbala's meaning.
اللهم صل
اللهم
على
صل على
محمد
محمد
وآل
آل محمد وأجل فرجه.
So the tragedy of Karbala was not only a moment of supreme sacrifice, it was also a turning point in the struggle for clarification. Without those who survived the battlefield, the full meaning of that sacrifice may never have reached the generations that followed. It was through the resolute voices of Sayyidah Zainab al-Kubra and Imam Ali ibn al-Husayn Zayn al-Abidin that the message of Ashura remained not merely a historical incident, but a living, burning truth within the conscience of the Ummah, of the community. If the Battle of Ashura represented the jihad of blood, then what followed in the 40 days leading to Arba'een was the jihad of clarification. The battle shifted from the plains of Karbala to the public squares of Kufa, to the courts of Damascus, and to the hearts of the people of Medina. The enemies had swords, they had thrones, and they had control of the media of their time. But the family of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him and his family, had insight, had truth, and they had divine courage. Sayyidah Zainab and Imam Sajjad took on the weight of this jihad at a moment when grief had crushed the hearts of the faithful. The martyrdom of Imam Husayn, the torchbearer of divine justice, was not allowed to be buried in silence. The survivors refused to let his blood be hidden beneath the lies. Through speeches, through supplications, dua, and through steadfastness, they clarified what had occurred and why. They exposed the crimes of Yazid and his followers. They defended the dignity of the martyrs and explained the philosophy of Ashura. And it was a stand for God, for justice, and against tyranny in every form. This is why Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq, peace and blessings be upon him, is reported to have said, whoever recites a single line of poetry about Imam Husayn and causes himself or others to weep, paradise is obligatory for him. Why such emphasis? Because in every age, the forces of injustice employ propaganda, distortion, and suppression of memory in order to further their ends. In the era of Umayyad rule, they sought to erase the truth of Karbala, to present the martyrs as rebels, and to silence the names of the Ahl al-Bayt. But those who survived Karbala stood as living proofs of what had truly taken place. Their clarification, their tabyeen, was itself a jihad. The mourning rituals and commemorations of Ashura are not isolated cultural phenomena. They are acts of resistance. Let me say that again. The mourning rituals and commemorations of Ashura are not isolated cultural phenomena. They are acts of resistance. They preserve the truth in the face of distortion, and they allow each generation to inherit the moral clarity that was sealed in the blood of the martyrs. Arba'een is not the end of Ashura. It is its extension. If Ashura represents the summit of sacrifice, then Arba'een represents the summit of steadfastness in clarifying that sacrifice. The journey from Karbala to Kufa to Damascus and back to Medina was not only physical, it was spiritual and it was a spiritual and cultural battlefield. Had it not been for the eloquence, the insight, and the endurance of Sayyidah Zainab, of Kulthum, of Imam Sajjad, the incident of Karbala may have faded into obscurity. But it did not. And it did not because the guardians of clarification fulfilled their divine responsibility. And if anyone needs evidence, this mere program is part of the results of their work. Please give me a salawat, and we speak about Ammar ibn Yasir, the voice of discernment in times of confusion.
اللهم
صل على
صل
محمد
على
وآل محمد.
So among the noble companions of the Prophet, few embody the spirit of unwavering clarity in the face of confusion like Ammar ibn Yasir. May God bless his pure soul. In times when outward religiosity masked inward corruption, and when even the faithful began to waver in doubt, Ammar stood as a beacon, illuminating truth when deception had clouded vision. During the Battle of Siffin, the commander of the faithful did not face outward disbelievers. Rather, he confronted a faction that outwardly professed Islam, people who prayed, people who recited the Quran, and people who outwardly appeared pious. This made the situation deeply complex and spiritually unsettling. For many, the line between right and wrong was no longer immediately visible. Some companions found themselves hesitant, asking, "Why are we fighting? What purpose does this serve?" In such moments, the presence of men like Ammar ibn Yasir was vital. He did not allow such confusion to linger. He recognized that ambiguity was a weapon of the enemy, and he responded with insight, history, and moral conviction. In one instance, as doubts began to spread within the camp, Ammar addressed those around him with the following piercing words: "This flag you see raised in the enemy's ranks, I saw it raised against the Prophet of God, peace and blessings be upon him and his family, at Badr and at Uhud. It is the same flag of Banu Umayyah. The same men stand beneath it today, Muawiyah and Amr ibn al-As. On this side stands Ali ibn Abi Talib under the same flag that flew with the Prophet, the flag of Bani Hashim. The same people who stood beneath it then stand beneath it now. This, he argued, should be enough of a sign. The flags had not changed. The factions had not changed. Only the pretext had shifted. In the past, the enemies of truth were proud disbelievers. In this new sedition, in this new fitna, they had cloaked themselves in Islam, weaponizing the Quran itself by raising it upon their spears. The brilliance of Ammar was not merely in his loyalty, but in his ability to pierce through deception. He saw what others could not or would not see. This is the true meaning of basira, or insight. It is not only the ability to distinguish between truth and falsehood in times of ease, but to remain firm even when those around you hesitate. Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq once said, "Had the commander of the faithful not fought those who prayed towards the Qibla, we would not have known who truly loved him and who opposed him." Ammar's greatness lies in the fact that he never hesitated. His tongue was a sword that struck down doubt wherever it arose, whether at Jamal or Siffin, whether at the dawn of the Khilafat or in its final battles. Ammar remained unshakable, a divine argument for all who sought clarity. There were others who shared his early companionship with the Prophet, men who had also suffered for Islam. But unlike Ammar, they failed to recognize the moment of responsibility. And in doing so, they became examples of spiritual regression. One such figure was Rabi ibn Quthaym. Once thought, close to righteous circles, he could not bring himself to join Imam Ali against the tyranny of Muawiyah. When questioned, he excused himself, seeking to avoid the confrontation. In contrast, Ammar understood that neutrality in the face of injustice is complicity. He knew that to abandon Imam Ali was to abandon the divine path. Therefore, in every generation, the likes of Ammar are needed, not just warriors, but clarifiers. Those who remove doubt, restore confidence, and declare truth when it is most dangerous to do so. This is why we remember Ammar, and why his path remains the straight path. Let us now look at the duty of scholars to defend divine governance. One of the most vital lessons to emerge from the legacy of clarification is the non-negotiable duty of scholars to defend a system grounded in divine authority. When governance is based upon the Quran and Islamic law, when judges, legislators, and institutions are tethered to the sacred, the silence of scholars becomes not only irresponsible, but a betrayal of their trust. To withdraw from such a system under the guise of neutrality or personal piety mirrors the conduct of those who abandoned the commander of the faithful during his caliphate. In the midst of battle and ideological struggle, some individuals, respected for their worship and learning, retreated to the peripheries, claiming no stake in the outcome. They excused themselves, saying, "These are our Muslim brothers. Send us to the frontiers instead so that we may fight in a less divisive cause." To such people, Imam Ali responded with disappointment. He said, "Go, we have no need for you here." He understood that in times of fitna, in times of sedition, retreat is not safety, it is dereliction of duty. To abstain from clarification when the truth is obscured is to empower falsehood by omission. Among those who failed in this test was Rabi ibn Quthaym, a man who had once walked the path of righteousness, but refused to support the Imam during Siffin. By contrast, Ammar ibn Yasir stood firm. Both had once been companions of the Prophet, Both had suffered for Islam, yet history remembers one as a hero and the other as a cautionary tale. Why is it that we greet Ammar and not others who were beaten alongside him in Mecca? It is because Ammar did not falter when clarity was most needed. He recognized the stakes of the moment and upheld the truth regardless of the consequences. In this, he became a decisive divine argument, not simply because of his piety, but because of his insight and courage at a critical time. The lesson is clear. Scholars do not merely transmit knowledge, they are guardians of truth. And with that role comes responsibility. In today's world, when the foundations of governance are based on Islamic principles, when the judiciary, the legislation, and the oversight bodies derive their legitimacy from religion, to remain silent is to mimic the same error committed by those who distance themselves from Imam Ali. Every scholar, every teacher, every bearer of religious responsibility, whether standing on the pulpit, issuing rulings, educating the community, or leading prayer, must see themselves as a servant of this divine system. This is not a burden, but an honor. To serve the revolution of God is to fulfill the purpose of knowledge. As Imam Ali said and taught, clarification is not a luxury, it is a duty, especially when the stakes are so high. This is not limited to the sword and battlefield. Some scholars clarify with their speech, some with their presence, and others with their silence in the face of pressure. A silence not of retreat, but of firmness and loyalty. To serve the Islamic system, to protect it from distortion, and to clarify its divine legitimacy is a source of dignity. It is a trust. And it is a chance that many before us could only dream of having. Please give me a loud salawat and we look at the modern exemplars of clarification.
اللهم صل
صل
على
على محمد وآل
محمد
محمد
وآل
وعجل فرجهم.
محمد وعجل.
So first, let us look at Imam Khomeini, the revolutionary clarifier. In every era, the burden of clarification finds its inheritors, those who rise not for power or popularity, but for truth, even when it costs them everything. In the modern age, few individuals exemplify this divine responsibility more fully than Imam Khomeini. His legacy lies not merely in his political leadership, but in the clarity of vision, firmness of faith, and the ability to speak the truth when others remain silent. What distinguished Imam Khomeini from other reformers in Islamic history was not only his knowledge, but his presence in the battlefield. He did not theorize from afar. He entered the arena, stood beside the people, and exposed the tyranny of the powerful with fearless transparency. He clarified the principles of Islam in the language of the people, turned passive listeners into active believers, and guiding a fractured society towards purpose and conviction. Where others faltered before the might of empires, Imam Khomeini stood firm, not with arms, but with God consciousness and ideological clarity. He confronted both external colonial arrogance and internal deviation, and he did so with the weapon that has always outlived all others, truth, articulated boldly and without ambiguity. His leadership did not end with the fall of a dynasty. He infused into the people a new spirit of resistance, one rooted in the legacy of Karbala and the mission of the prophets. The Islamic movement he led was not confined to national borders. It was a universal call to the oppressed, a call to revive Islam and liberate the Muslim world from intellectual, political, and spiritual bondage. This, then, is why his name endures. Imam Khomeini is not merely a political figure. He is a modern exemplar of the jihad of clarification, one who reawakened the divine argument in an age clouded by compromise and materialism. The second one we will look at is Ayatollah Shahid Madani, the scholar of light and connection. Among the martyrs of the Islamic movement, Ayatollah Shaheed Madani stands as a shining exemplar of what it means to be a scholar who clarifies, one whose intellect was weighty, whose tongue was eloquent, and whose heart radiated sincerity. He was not a man of mere rhetoric or academic aloofness. He was a scholar who lived with the people, spoke to their hearts, and carried the trust of clarification wherever he went. Firstly, he was a man of formidable knowledge, a jurist, a thinker, a man of deep spiritual insight. But his greatness was not confined to his learning. What made him exceptional was his ability to convey that knowledge across all levels of society, from intellectuals and seminarians to the youth and the lay people. It is said in our narrations, an eloquent scholar who acts upon his knowledge. Shaheed Madani was the embodiment of this hadith. His eloquence was not theatrical, it was sincere, and it flowed from a heart illuminated by divine purpose. When he stood before youth, they felt he was their elder brother or father. When he sat amongst scholars, he inspired respect without distance. His spiritual and intellectual aura did not create barriers, rather it created bridges. There are many examples of his luminous influence. In one instance, during the early days of the war, the 8-year war, the imposed war of Iraq on Iran, he traveled to Suzangard, which is a town liberated in a fragile moment of victory. Despite the danger, he insisted on accompanying a group to the region. When others spoke, he remained attentive. But when his turn came, he rose, speaking not in Persian, but in the local dialect of Arabic, capturing the hearts of the men and women around him. His words delivered in their tongue drew the people toward him with warmth, respect, and spiritual enthusiasm. On another occasion, during a national seminar in Qom for all the Friday prayer leaders, both Sunni and Shia, Ayatollah Madani stood to address the gathering. As he spoke, tears poured down his cheeks, soaking his beard as water streams from a fountain. One could not help but remember the narrations about the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him and his family, whose tears would flow in supplication like water from a spout. He transformed the mood of the entire assembly, not through clever arguments or political slogans, but through the purity of his soul, which carried the weight of truth with humility. Whether addressing scholars, the common people, or students, he possessed the gift of clarification, making the unseen visible, the complex accessible, and the spiritual tangible. He transferred not just ideas, but states from his heart to theirs. Shaheed Madani was not only a martyr of the body, he was a martyr of truth in speech, of purity in service, and of clarification as jihad. Now we look at the martyrs Mutahhari and Beheshti, clarifying with knowledge and blood. In every generation, there arise individuals whose sacrifice is demanded, not in battlefields of steel, but in the areas of knowledge, reform, and truth-telling. Among such souls were Shaheed Murtada Mutahhari and Shaheed Sayyid Muhammad Husayn Beheshti, two luminous scholars whose lives and martyrdoms reflected the unbroken tradition of the jihad of clarification. They stood not at the military front lines, but on the intellectual and political front lines of the Islamic awakening. Their pens, their lectures, their strategies, all were dedicated to unveiling the truths of religion, to countering deviation and explaining the foundations of Islamic governance to a people emerging from the shadows of tyranny and alienation. Their martyrdoms were not accidental. They were targeted by the enemies of truth, not for waging war, but for waging clarification. Their crime was to speak clearly. Their fault was to raise the banner of authentic Islam. In doing so, they pierced through layers of cultural confusion, of Westoxification, and pseudo-religiosity, and for that, they paid with their lives. This is a reminder that the path of clarification has always been paved with sacrifice. For some, like Imam Husayn, it is the sacrifice of blood on the battlefield. For others, like Shaykh Mutahari and Shaykh Beheshti, it is the sacrifice of safety, comfort, and ultimately life, not for silence, but for speech. As has always been the case in Islamic history, every age calls for its own martyrs, not only in war, but in seminaries, in parliaments, in courtrooms, in lecture halls. Whether it be the first martyr, for example, Shahid al-Awwal, or the second, whether in ancient times or in modern revolutions, the struggle to clarify the truth remains constant. The only thing that changes is the battlefield. In the lives of Shahid Mutahari and Shahid Beheshti, we see that battlefield clearly. It is the battlefield of the soul, the conflict between light and deception, between principled resistance and passive retreat. Their martyrdoms were not the end of their mission. They became eternal witnesses to the power of truth and reminders that clarification will always demand courage. Please give me a salawat and we move to the conclusion.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
So clarification as a living trust and civilizational duty. Clarification, Tabyeen, is not merely a response to confusion. It is a trust, an amana, placed upon the shoulders of those who inherit the truth. It is the lifeblood of Islamic civilization, the means by which values are preserved, hopes are restored, and history is steered in the direction of justice. In this session, we have explored how clarification becomes public discourse, a shield against psychological warfare, a vehicle for operationalizing divine concepts, and a safeguard for the hearts and hopes of the people. We have seen how silence can be complicity, and how truth must be not only believed, but boldly articulated, and how scholars, poets, and thinkers form the cultural immune system of a believing society. We have also seen how clarification was not invented in our age. It was inherited. It was the mission of the prophets, as described by the commander of the faithful in al-Balagha, to awaken intellects, unveil divine signs, and complete the argument of God. It was the path of the messenger of God, who stood firm against ignorance and empire alike. It was the duty of the Imams, who clarified truth under persecution, under imprisonment, and under martyrdom. It was the legacy of Sayyidah Zainab and Imam Sajjad, who carried the meaning of Karbala from battlefield to court, from grief to remembrance, and from remembrance to revolution. It was embodied in Ammar ibn Yasir, whose voice cut through the fog of religious hypocrisy with the sharpness of certainty, and in the scholars and martyrs who, in every age, refused to retreat when the truth was obscured. From the luminous soul of Shahid Madani, who spoke with the language of the people and wept with the sincerity of the prophets, to the intellectual clarity and ultimate sacrifice of Shahid Mutahari and Shahid Beheshti, who taught that blood spilt for truth becomes ink for the future. Indeed, we have witnessed how clarification built a revolution, how it gave shape to the ideas of Tawheed, monotheism, Wilaya, guardianship, Ubudiyya, servitude, and Jihad, struggle, in the streets and souls of a people. From Imam Khomeini's relentless articulation of divine values to the seminaries of Qom that carried the message into villages and cities, and to the youth who gathered in mosques, hungering not for entertainment, but for meaning. The history of the Islamic awakening is the history of clarification. In the darkest hours, such as the martyrdoms of 1981, it was the pulpit that carried the burden of light, transmitting truth to a wounded but vigilant nation. These are not footnotes of history, they are maps for the future. But such a duty is not reserved for a select few. As we have seen, every believing man and woman is entrusted with Tabyeen, with clarification, whether through word, action, scholarship, or presence. The obligation to clarify is universal. The world today, no less than yesterday, is enveloped in veils of distortion. And those veils can only be torn down by those who speak with insight, with patience, and devotion to God. As we turn now to the next phase of our discussion, we explore the requirements of clarification, the moral, intellectual, and spiritual conditions without which Tabyeen becomes hollow and guidance becomes lost. Let us continue then with reverence, resolve, and readiness, for the path ahead is not one of mere commentary, but of responsibility. Please give me a salawat and we move to the supplication eulogy.
اللهم
صل
صل
على
على
محمد
محمد.
So tonight's supplication eulogy is titled The One Who Returned. In his name, the Lord of the martyrs and the truthful. O God, send your blessings upon Muhammad and the family of Muhammad. O the one who opens the doors of return. O the one who forgives before the hand is raised. O the one who knows the trembling of the guilty heart. Tonight we remember the one who came back, the one who stood between light and shadow, the one whose limbs obeyed Yazid, but whose heart was burning for the son of Fatima. O Hur, what storm raged inside your soul that morning when you saw the tents of Husayn pitched, when your own army sharpened its blades? You asked, am I to choose between hell and paradise? By God, I will never choose the fire. O my Lord, how beautiful is the soul that turns back. He turned not with pride, but with chains of regret. He came not with the gait of a warrior, but with the brokenness of a beggar. He came weeping, head lowered, sword sheathed, saying, O son of the messenger of God, will you forgive me? Will you accept me? Though I was the first to block your path, let me now be the first to fall in your defense. And what did Hussein say? Raise your head, Hur. I have forgiven you. O God, how many of us are like Hur, delayed in our obedience, late in our loyalty, torn between tyrant and truth? How many of us wake each morning on the wrong side of the battlefield? Let this night be our turning. Let this be our Karbala. Let us leave behind the tents of falsehood and walk, even trembling, to the shadow of Hussein. O son of Hassan, you who wait for the moment to cry, Ya Litharat al-Hussein, O avengers of Hussein, do not look for us in the ranks of comfort. Do not find us among the men of the world. Call us, and we will come. Though our shame burdens us, though our past condemns us, let us be of those who return. Let us be Hur. Let us be Hur. Let us be free. وآخر الدعوان أن الحمد لله رب العالمين والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.